Something is off. You're standing in a city. The streets are quiet. Too quiet. 3 days ago, your neighbor was healthy. Yesterday, he was sick. This morning, he was gone. And you're standing in your kitchen, staring at your food, thinking, if I eat the right thing, maybe I survive this. That thought, that desperate, terrified thought, killed more people than the disease itself. Because here's what history shows us over and over again. During humanity's deadliest epidemics, the plague, cholera, typhoid, smallpox, people made food decisions based on fear. And fear is the worst advisor you'll ever have. A respected doctor told an entire city to eat a specific food during the Black Death. They trusted him. They followed his advice. It accelerated the outbreak. A food eaten by millions every single day. Ordinary, cheap, completely normal, was silently carrying a deadly epidemic from one city to the next. Nobody caught it, because nobody looked there, and one food, one that people believed was protecting them, was the reason entire families were found dead, with no explanation for nearly 2 centuries. 12 foods, each one attached to a moment in history where human psychology broke down completely. This isn't about what people ate. It's about why they ate it, and what that choice cost them. Let's go back. Here's what nobody tells you about epidemics. The disease doesn't choose its victims randomly. It follows behavior. It follows habit. It follows the decisions people make when they're not thinking straight. And the most repeated decision in human history? What to eat. 3 times a day. Every day. Even when the streets outside are filled with death. You'd think people would be more careful during a crisis. You'd think fear would make them sharper. It doesn't. Fear makes people predictable. Fear makes people grab what's familiar. Fear makes people trust the wrong things for the right-sounding reasons. That's the real story of every epidemic in history. Not just the virus, not just the bacteria, but the human mind, under maximum pressure, making the same mistakes, over and over again. The foods in this video aren't just historical facts. They're mirrors. Every single one reflects something true about how humans behave, when survival feels uncertain. And when you see the pattern, and you will see it, you'll realize it's something uncomfortable. You would have made the same choices. So would I. So would everyone. That's what makes this so hard to look away from. So here's the question nobody was asking during these epidemics. Not the doctors, not the governments, not the scientists. The question is this: why do humans, when facing death, consistently choose the thing that makes it worse? Not because they're stupid, not because they didn't care, because the human brain has one goal during a crisis. Feel safe. Right now. Not be safe. Feel safe. And food is one of the most powerful tools the brain uses to feel safe. It's warm. It's familiar. It's comforting. It reminds you of a time before the fear started. So when death is outside your door, you don't reach for the unfamiliar. You reach for what you know. And that instinct, that deeply human, completely understandable instinct, became a weapon that epidemics used against entire populations. The foods you're about to hear weren't just foods. They were psychological decisions made by terrified people trying to survive. Some of those decisions were accidental miracles. Some are silent killers dressed up as comfort. And a few were so deeply woven into culture and identity that even when people started suspecting the truth, they kept eating anyway. That's where we begin. Number 12, citrus fruit. A Portuguese ship leaves Lisbon. 160 men on board. By the time it returns, 100 are dead. Not from storms, not from battles. Their gums were bleeding. Their teeth were falling out. Their legs had turned black. Scurvy. And the ones who survived? They had been eating oranges and lemons. Picked up at a port stop in Africa. They didn't know why it worked. The captain didn't write it down as medicine. He wrote it down as luck. But it wasn't luck. It was vitamin C. And its absence was quietly killing sailors across every major epidemic voyage for another 200 years, because nobody connected the food to the survival. They had the answer. They just didn't recognize it as an answer. Number 11, bone broth. Every culture, every continent, every epidemic. Someone was boiling bones. During the plague outbreaks across medieval Europe, when wealthy families had already fled the cities, the people left behind were surviving on broth, bones, water, whatever scraps remained. At the time, people thought it was just poor man's food, something you ate when there was nothing else. But here's what was actually happening. Boiling bones releases collagen, minerals, and compounds that directly support immune function. The people who couldn't afford real food, the ones everyone assumed would die first, were accidentally feeding their immune systems exactly what they needed. Poverty saved them, and nobody noticed for centuries. Number 10, garlic. This one has a name attached to it. During the Great Plague of Marseille in 1720, a group of gravediggers was assigned the worst job imaginable. Collect the bodies, thousands of them, from streets, from homes, from churches. Every other person who got close to those bodies got sick. These men didn't. When authorities finally asked why, the answer was garlic. They were eating it raw, rubbing on their skin, soaking it in vinegar, and drinking it. People called it witchcraft, called it superstition. But garlic contains allicin, one of the most powerful natural antimicrobial compounds ever studied. They didn't know the science. They just knew it worked. And they were right. Wait, did you notice something? 3 foods, 3 different epidemics, 3 different centuries. And in every single case, the people who survived didn't know why they survived. They stumbled into the answer. By accident, by poverty, by habit. Nobody was running experiments. Nobody was tracking data. They were just eating what they had. And sometimes, just sometimes, what they had happened to be right. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. For every accidental miracle, there was an accidental disaster happening at the exact same time. Right next door, in the same city, during the same outbreak. People making equally confident food choices, based on equally strong beliefs, getting equally dead. The difference between the 2 groups wasn't intelligence. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't even access. It was randomness dressed up as wisdom. And that should bother you, because it means the survivors, the ones history remembers as clever, careful, prepared, were sometimes just lucky. They made the right call for the wrong reasons. And the ones who died, they made the wrong call for reasons that made complete sense at the time. That's the pattern. And it's about to get stranger. Number 9, white rice. 1890s, Japan. The Japanese Navy has a problem. Sailors are dying. Not from battle. From a disease called beriberi. Weakness. Paralysis. Heart failure. Thousands of men. Every single year. The Navy's chief medical officer had a theory. He believed it was an infection. A germ. A bacteria. Something in the air. He spent years looking for it. Never found it. Meanwhile, a different doctor tried something unusual. He changed what the sailors ate. Less white rice. More barley. More vegetables. The death stopped. Almost completely. The first doctor refused to believe it. He was a respected scientist. He had a theory, and his theory could not be wrong. So he kept looking for a germ that didn't exist. while men kept dying from a vitamin deficiency. That was sitting right in front of him. White rice had been stripped of vitamin B1 during processing. That single nutritional removal killed an estimated 100,000 people in Japan before anyone in power accepted the truth. The enemy wasn't a disease. It was a food they had made worse by trying to make it look better. Number 8, milk. Late 1800s. American cities. Milk was medicine. Doctors prescribed it. Mothers trusted it. Everyone drank it. And it was killing children by the thousands. Raw, unrefrigerated milk traveling through summer heat was carrying typhoid, scarlet fever, and tuberculosis directly into family homes. But here's the psychological part. When health officials tried to warn people, when they published reports, rang alarm bells, begged for action, the public pushed back hard. Milk was pure. Milk was natural. Milk was from the farm. How could something so wholesome be dangerous? The emotional attachment to milk's identity was stronger than the evidence against it. People chose the story over the data, and children kept dying for decades until pasteurization was eventually forced through, not because people were convinced, but because the death numbers became impossible to ignore. Number 7, sugar. The Spanish flu is killing millions. And in hospitals across America, nurses are feeding patients sugar. Lots of it. Sugar water, sweet broths, sugary tonics. It felt caring. It felt nourishing. Patients wanted it. Families requested it. But here's what sugar does inside a sick body. It feeds inflammation. It suppresses immune response. It creates the exact internal conditions that make viral infections harder to fight. They were feeding the disease with kindness, with care, with the best intentions imaginable. And the patients who were strong enough to survive anyway were doing it slower and harder than they needed to. Good intentions, wrong food, devastating timing. Here's what just happened. You watched 12 foods move through history, and somewhere around number 6, you stopped seeing food. You started seeing people, terrified people, desperate people, people who loved their families and trusted their leaders, and ate what they had always eaten, and died anyway, and people who had nothing, no doctors, no institutions, no authority telling them what to do, who boiled bones and drank beer and rubbed garlic on their skin, and accidentally survived, while the educated and the certain were falling around them. That gap between the certain and the accidental is the most important thing in this entire video, because it tells you something true about crisis. Crisis doesn't reward confidence. It doesn't reward tradition. It doesn't reward the loudest voice in the room, or the most expensive solution, or the belief held by the most people. Crisis rewards accuracy, and accuracy is painful because accuracy means admitting that what you believed yesterday might be killing you today. The Japanese Navy doctor who kept looking for a germ, he wasn't a villain. He was a man who had spent his entire life building a belief system that one inconvenient truth was about to destroy. The parents defending raw milk, they weren't reckless. They were protecting something that felt sacred. The politicians fighting Goldberger over corn, they weren't evil. They were protecting an identity that their entire world was built around. Every single person in this video made decisions that made complete sense inside the reality they were living in. That's what makes it so hard to watch, because you wouldn't have done better. Neither would I. We would have eaten the bread. We would have trusted the cans. We would have followed the doctor and defended the tradition and chosen the feeling of safety over the fact of danger. Every single time. Because that's not a character flaw. That's a human brain, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Find comfort. Reduce uncertainty. Make the fear stop. The problem is, the world doesn't care about your comfort. Epidemics don't negotiate with your identity. Disease doesn't respect your traditions. Death doesn't pause while you finish, being certain about the wrong thing. And that gap, between what feels safe and what actually is safe, has been the silent killer behind every epidemic in human history. Not the virus, not the bacteria, the belief. Here's the question you should be sitting with right now. Not which food saved the most lives. Not which epidemic was the worst. The real question is this. What are you certain about right now that is quietly wrong? Because every person in this video was certain. The doctor searching for a germ that didn't exist. Certain. The government defending contaminated milk. Certain. The expedition that sailed into the Arctic with poisoned food and a winning strategy. Absolutely certain. Certainty didn't protect them. It aimed them directly at the thing that was going to kill them. And here's what history keeps trying to tell us. In epidemic after epidemic, century after century, civilization after civilization, the most dangerous moment is not when you are confused. Confusion makes you careful. Confusion makes you question. Confusion keeps you looking. The most dangerous moment is when the confusion stops. When you think you have the answer. When the pattern feels familiar. When the food feels safe. And the doctor sounds confident. And everyone around you is doing the same thing. That's the moment. That's when epidemics win. Not through force. Through comfort. The Black Death didn't defeat Europe with power. It defeated Europe with habit. With the deeply human need to keep doing what has always been done, even when everything around you is changing. And the people who survived, the sailors eating citrus by accident, the gravediggers soaking garlic in vinegar, the poor families boiling bones in empty kitchens. They survived not because they were smarter. They survived because circumstances forced them out of their comfort zone, away from the familiar, into the uncertain. And in that uncertainty, they accidentally found the truth. So the next time you feel certain about anything, pause. Ask yourself one question. Is this actually safe? Or does it just feel safe? Because in the history of human survival, that single question has been the difference between the living and the dead. 12 foods, 12 epidemics, one pattern. The enemy was never outside the door. It was sitting at the table. If this video made you see something differently, something about fear, about certainty, about the stories we tell ourselves to feel safe, then you already know what to do. Because the next video goes even deeper. Same pattern, different crisis, and a truth that is significantly harder to sit with than anything you heard today. It's already waiting for you.